Good evening all, and welcome. Going to the movie theatre is surely a favourite pastime for a lot of us, distracting yourself from the reality of the world and becoming engaged in motion pictures. I for one do love them myself. However, these halls of entertainment may be harbouring a dark side. It's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. When I was younger, my father worked a part-time job cleaning the local theatre after shows. Occasionally he would let me tag along, and I would help him out for some extra allowance money. This building was built in 1916 and had been used as an auditorium and for formal dinners. Most areas/floors, 4 floors and a basement, had been blocked or converted off by the 90s. This theatre had 2 screens, a huge first floor screen and a small upstairs one. We worked alone in this locked building. One night I was sweeping up popcorn in the bottom cinema while my father cleaned the stairs going to the top floor. I got about 3 rows of seats cleaned when what sounded like a baby started crying at the bottom of the rows. This was very loud and distinct. I froze. It lasted about 10 seconds until I ran to my father. He looked and found nothing. It wasn't unusual for teenagers to try and sneak in for the night. On the last occasion I helped him, I was cleaning with my father in the small upstairs cinema. As soon as we walked through the door, something like a dark figure bolted for the fire exit around the corner, down a small hall. Those doors had alarms that were always set. This thing disappeared and didn't set off any alarms. Dad did a full search again, and nothing. I never went back to help him clean. My father said the theatre never bothered him, and whoever was there was just keeping him company. It probably helped that my father is deaf and never had to hear what I did. The theatre is called Bad Axe Theatre, if anyone is interested. I don't believe in ghosts or spirits now, but my 11 to 12-year-old self did not like that place. These are my older brother's experiences. He used to work at a movie theatre about 2 to 3 years ago, when he was about 23 or so. This theatre was large and stood out in our tiny Oregon coast town. My brother Alex was going to work there to get extra money, along with my mother's friend Jill, who was a manager at the time. He started out in janitorial work late at night to the early hours of the morning. At first it was a pain to him. He hated getting up for the graveyard shifts, but the weird stuff that kept happening meant he would keep going back. One night he was on bathroom duty, just as Jill left to take another worker home, leaving him by himself. As he was cleaning a stall, he could hear someone's footsteps enter the bathroom, to slowly go into the stall next to him and lock the door. He quickly got up to check the stall next to him, which swung open easily with one yank, and no one was in the stall. Needless to say, he got out of the bathroom faster than a bat out of hell, and waited a good 30 minutes in the candies room to calm down. Even other workers had complained of weird things happening, such as people walking behind them, breathing on their necks, whispering, touching, and things moving in the projection room. Even workers before them reported the hydraulic doors slamming and lights flickering. Apparently, last janitors that worked there made the spirit angry enough that he would manifest in the storage rooms or in reflections scaring them. To make the workplace a little less scary, Alex's friend Stacy decided to nickname the spirit Bob. Pretty nice name. Not even kidding. He shook the door at her when she named him. Now Bob was an interesting fellow. As the months and hauntings continued, my brother noticed a pattern with him. His favorite theater rooms were 3 and 6, where horror movies played. He realized they might be his favorites because he was able to feed off the fear the moviegoers would feel. This was one of the best theories he could come up with, which actually makes sense. Bob also had a sense of humor. Bad humor. In the theater there was a place that the employees would call the Ghost Hall, which is a long concrete hallway used as an emergency exit. But other than that, never really had a purpose. On my brother's end shift, where he would have to lock up and set up the security system, Bob would leave the door at the end of the ghost hallway open, wait for my brother to notice on the security cameras, wait for him to go and try to close it, and then slam it, leaving him in the dark with at least 20 feet of darkness above and 10 feet of darkness around. He never successfully locked him out of the theater, but started to take a liking to him. He was worried if it was demonic at one point, where he would request a light off at will and have it shut off. He quit his job a while ago, but that still doesn't stop him from seeing Bob moving around the projection window. Amazing and creepy. I used to work at a movie theater. Last night I was closing and had my first real paranormal experience. Around midday, we had to take care of cleaning a big theater. It was theater number 1, and it was one of the bigger ones. It was just me and 2 of my co-workers cleaning it. Now this auditorium was pretty dark during cleaning, because it had less lights on because some had burnt out, and maintenance hadn't had a chance to change them. We were all in there basically in the dark, and I did something a bit ballsy. Being a skeptic, I thought it would be funny to jokingly call out to a ghost to show itself. "Why is this ghost so lame and not showing itself?" I said out loud to my co-workers. One of them was new, like me, and the other one was laughing but said, "Nah, don't joke like that." So I apologized to the ghost and laughed it off, because I was still skeptical. As we were cleaning, the conversation suddenly died, and I heard the familiar buzz of a seat reclining in the theater. I looked up from my broom, and all around, to notice my co-workers were doing the same. I was expecting to see one joking about, but we were all equally confused. There was no one in the theater but us, but the sounds persisted for a few more seconds until they stopped. We began talking again to brush off the nerves, and a few times through the conversation we overheard it again from a few other directions. We just talked through it and ignored it. That same day, it was already past closing time. The people cleaning with me had left already, and I was stuck with the closing shift alone. The few people there were workers in the concession area, and the few customers in the theaters watching movies. I had to change the soap in the restroom dispensers, so I went in, as I knew I was alone in the restroom. The stall at the very end of the restroom we keep locked, because, at the moment, the toilet is broken. I'm changing the dispenser closest to said stall, and I get this odd feeling. Then I heard the locked door start to rattle, and bang, as if someone was in the stall. I freak out and loudly say, "Screw that," and rush out. I walk over to concessions while looking back at the restroom, and get a co-worker to go in there with me. He checks the stalls and sees it's locked and empty, but there's no one in there but us. There's no way some breeze could have banged a door like that. I just want to preface this by saying the following actually happened. I've been lucky enough to have a few paranormal experiences in my life, and this happens to be one of those instances. When I graduated college, I moved back home into that weird post-grad limbo where I get a real job and try to figure out what I want to do with the rest of my life. In the meantime, I wanted one last summer of procrastination before I jumped into the real world. So I asked my friend to hook me up with a job at the local movie theatre. He had worked there for a couple of summers during school as a morning cleaner, running a shift from 4 a.m. to 10 a.m. every morning. It wasn't a great job, but it paid more than minimum wage, which was pretty hard to come by in a town oversaturated with college kids. I interviewed and got the job when I was highly recommended by my friend. The guy who interviewed me would also be my manager, a scruffy guy named Jeff. He smoked like a chimney and made tank tops and cut-off jeans a solid part of the wardrobe. He also looked like he hadn't had a good night of sleep in years, but that could have also been all the hard drinking he did every night. I remember he asked me the typical questions: if I was okay with working weird hours, cleaning up vomit, etc. I had worked in fast food as a teenager, so none of that stuff had bothered me. What struck me as odd was the last question he asked. Do you scare easy? I kinda laughed and said no. He shrugged and said, well, some new hires get kind of spooked by these big buildings at night. You know how it is. Big building. It makes all kind of noises. Makes sense to me. I have a very active imagination, but I had a hard time being scared in a movie theater of all places. I started my new job the next day. For the first few weeks, everything was pretty normal. The job was actually pretty easy. All things considered, throw this away, mop that, scrub this, wipe that, take out the garbage. You're by yourself the majority of the shift. We were allowed to bring our iPods with us. The theatre was fairly large. Its layout was shaped like a T, with the lobby and bathrooms in the stem. The smaller theatres on the left and the larger IMAX screens on the right. Running above the theatre hallway was the projection area, an equally long hallway with a couple of small offices and all of the projector equipment. If you were the first to arrive in the morning, you had to go up a winding staircase and turn on the lights in all the theatres. It wasn't a big deal, except with all the lights off. The building can be, as Jeff once described it, a little creepy. The projector area was full of promotional material, including a sea of cardboard cutouts from all the movies they have playing in the theatre. Sometimes, the theatre manager would have giveaways, and staff could take home some of the items. Pretty cool, but when the lights were off, it looked like a sea of people in the hallway. Another part of our job was to meet with the day crew after our shift at 10 a.m. and go over any maintenance problems we were dealing with, and they could highlight anything we needed to address on our next shift. The second thing to strike me as odd was the day manager, Bob, pulling me aside after my shift. "You're the new guy, right?" he asked. "Yes?" And he put a pair of keys into my hand. "Can you make sure this place is locked up at night? I know you guys are usually in the back or upstairs. I don't want anyone sneaking in while you're occupied." I asked him if that was a problem. He looked a little flustered and went on to explain that customers primarily women, were complaining about a tall, lanky man in a suit that had been following several of them from theatre to theatre, sometimes into the bathroom. The last several months, several frightened women had come to the front desk, describing a 7-foot-tall man in a black suit, complete with bowler cap, walking slowly after them. A few times, even the police were called. Teenagers that worked the day shift referred to him as the tall man. While he primarily targeted women, occasionally a male co-worker would capture a glimpse of him, sneaking into a theatre. On a couple of occasions, they would pursue, thinking it was someone trying to sneak into a movie, only to find nobody there. We had 12 theatre rooms in total, but Theatre 5 was the worst. Nobody wanted to clean it out when I first started. I was fairly naive about what was going on, and didn't understand why Jeff was so apprehensive about Theatre 5, and kept assigning me to clean it out. What made Theatre 5 unique was that it was sat behind the bathrooms in the lobby, so to get to the sitting area, you had to walk down a long hallway before reaching the screening room. Being that far back, you were the most secluded, especially when it's 4 a.m. and the only other people you are with are on the other side of the building. People cleaning there would complain of nosebleeds, constant headaches, and a feeling of being watched. My first supernatural experience took place here. Theatre 5 always gave me an uneasy feeling, like I was being watched. On multiple occasions, I would take out my earbuds and shout, "Hello?" into the empty theatre. Of course, there would be no response, and I would shake it off and just go back to my routine. One day, I was sweeping out garbage from under the seats when I hear footsteps. Someone running. I look down at the front of the theatre, and I catch a glimpse of a little blonde-haired boy turning the corner into the long hallway. Immediately, I threw down my broom and chased after him. I ran down the hallway and out into the lobby, where the kid had disappeared. I walked further into the lobby and saw my boss outside the front entrance on a smoke break. "Who was that kid?" I asked. Jeff looked at me for a moment. He was confused, but then he laughed. I'll never forget how casually he said it. "Oh, so you met Charlie?" Charlie was another entity customers complained about. On several occasions, they claimed a little blonde-haired boy was running up and down the aisles in the theatre, causing all kinds of noise and ruckus during the movie. Of course, it was in Theatre 5. When an usher would come to apprehend the child, he'd be gone. The female staff affectionately named him Charlie, after his resemblance to the character in Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. Charlie was also responsible for knocking several cans of garbage over, throwing paper around, misplacing things, and making our janitorial duties a pain in the ass. Charlie wasn't frightening, just more of a nuisance than anything. We used to theorize that he was the son of the tall man, but these two were never seen together. It took that experience for Jeff to admit that some people have seen and heard some things, which was his way of saying that the theatre was haunted. I found it odd, considering the theatre was relatively new. It was built in the 90s, on some wetlands. According to some people that lived in the area, the property was owned by a family who sold it off back in the 1980s. There was no evidence of foul play. It wasn't an Indian burial ground. It was just a weird place where strange things happened. I didn't even realize there was a basement until my 3rd or 4th week. The basement, as I was told, was primarily used for storage. I'd give you a better description, but that's as much as I know considering the one time I was asked to go down there. I didn't even know where the hell it was, It was a Thursday, and I was ready to get out of there. I remember that I had the next couple of days off, and I was ready to relax a little bit when I got home. I still had plenty of time on my shift, but this particular morning, I was really dragging ass. Jeff gave me a couple of bags and told me to drop them off in the basement. I said I didn't know where it was, and he pointed down the hall. Last door on the left, marked employees only, he replied. I started walking away, and he stopped me. Don't go down there by yourself, he added, with a bit of hesitation. There's a lot of stuff down there, and I don't want you tripping over anything. There were usually only 3 of us working a shift. This morning it was Jeff, myself, and a co-worker named Trevor. Trevor was on the other side of the building cleaning out a theatre. I could hear his leaf blower running. Yeah, we use leaf blowers to blow the popcorn out the theatre. I didn't want to bother walking across the building to grab him. I figured I'm an adult, and I can drop a few bags in a room for Christ's sakes. Jeff walks out the lobby to have a smoke, and Trevor is down at the other end of the building. I'm by myself, at the far end of a dark hallway. I open the door, and I'm looking at a long staircase that drops into the darkness. I flip the light switch to my left, and there's a light at the bottom of the staircase. It's flickering. Of course it's flickering. Nobody ever went down there to fix it. I heard a door open from the lobby. Jeff hadn't returned. I'm just hearing things. I look back down the staircase that I'm about to descend, where I hear a voice from the bottom of the steps. Hey. It's a low, raspy voice, and I pause. Hey, come here, it says again. There's a shadow bleeding in from the bottom of the staircase. I can't tell what it is, but it's definitely a person. Hello? I call down. I don't know why I did. I know that I'm the only person on this side of the building. I know that there isn't just some person hiding out in a dark basement. At this point, my heart is pounding, and I'm starting to sweat, because I know this isn't normal, and I'm experiencing something that shouldn't be happening. You gotta see this. Come here and look, it says again. The voice is a little louder. It sounds scratchy, like someone with a cold. The shadow is bleeding further into the bottom of the steps. Whatever's down there is coming closer. I toss the bag down to the bottom of the steps, turn off the light, and walk back down to the lobby. Jeff is walking back inside, reeking of cigarettes. I tell him about what happened. He has a look on his face that tells me this isn't the first time something like this has occurred. He almost looks irritated when I tell him I was going to go by myself. Nothing here's gonna hurt you, he said finally. I will never not be shocked at how casual he was about the whole thing. I think I was more taken aback by Jeff's reaction than I was by the actual incident. Later on, I told Trevor about what had happened. We went back to the steps to investigate, and when I turned on the flickering lights, the bags I had thrown down were gone. Theatre 5 had its instances, and the basement was particularly scary, but nothing was quite as bad as my experiences with the projector area. Around 6 a.m., we would take a 30-minute break. Jeff and Trevor would usually go to McDonald's to eat, but it was always too early for me, so I'd lay in the hall and listen to my iPod. No matter how loudly I turned up the music, I could never cancel out the sound of the footsteps from the projector area. It sounded like a 300-pound lineback sprinting back and forth, Heavy, loud thumps up and down the hall above me. I told Jeff about it once, and he remarked that it was just the building settling, and there was a lot of equipment upstairs making all sorts of noise. Jeff wasn't the smartest guy, but that didn't stop him from insulting anyone else's intelligence. Maybe he was trying to keep me from quitting. The turnover rate was pretty intense at the theatre for cleaning staff, and the creepiness was a big factor. The pay was pretty garbage too, but that's a whole other story. So it wasn't before long I started feeling apprehensive about going upstairs to check the projectors and turn on the lights in the theatres below. On one particular occasion, I was walking up the steps to the hallway, and I heard what sounded like a child call my name from the bottom of the steps. I knew it was Charlie, because how many children are in the theatre at 4 a.m? That was the first real instance of hearing my name. For a week straight, I'd hear voices echoing down the hall from the projector room, Theatre 5, or down the hall. That was easy to ignore once I put my iPod on, but it never shook the feeling of being watched. I'd never seen the tall man in person. I had only ever heard instances where I encountered Charlie, heard noises or saw shadows. My only experience with it was at the start of my shift, when I was the first to arrive at work. If you're first, it's your job to go upstairs and turn on the theatre lights in the projector hall. I wasn't happy about it, but it looked like it was going to be another morning where Jeff and Trevor were late, and I didn't want to mess up my shift by waiting around. Since the projector area is dark, typically we'd carry a flashlight with us while going around flipping switches. That morning, I couldn't find the flashlight. We'd later find it in the garbage, Charlie's fault. So I walked through the dark hallway of the projectors, flipping all the switches. I had stayed up all night prior watching the Andy Griffith Show. I remember because I was whistling the theme song to myself as I walked down the corridor. Once again, I got that feeling of being watched, and something several yards away in the area with the projectors overlooking the IMAX theatre was staring back at me. I stopped whistling and tried to focus my eyes. It was a cardboard cutout. They were everywhere, so I kind of dismissed it and was about to flip the next switch when the cutout moved. I froze. What I thought was a cutout was actually a figure hunched over. It was quietly whistling the Andy Griffith theme song, imitating me, only whistling slowly. It slowly rose up from its crouch, revealing itself to be at least 7 feet tall. It was a man. All I could see was a silhouette against the red exit sign lights and some of the projector computer monitors. It started towards me, whistling quietly. I wanted to move, but for some reason my feet were cemented in the spot, and I had cotton for a tongue. I didn't know what to do. Slowly the tall man stepped towards me. He walked with a bit of a waddle, as if he had a limp in his left leg. I couldn't exactly tell. He had taken about 3 or 4 steps towards me when something caught his attention, and he turned and walked into an office down the hall. I turned back and ran down the steps and waited outside the theatre until my boss and the rest of the crew arrived. I told them what had happened, and they explained that the tall man existed, but he wasn't going to hurt me. I didn't care. I put in my 2 weeks and haven't looked back. I worked at a movie theatre, and there have been tons of accounts of paranormal activity. A manager has told me about their experience with seeing a full apparition and having unexplained things happen to them while there. I started working there back in October, and the place has just been renovated, so the whole lobby and the auditoriums are completely redone. I've always been interested in the paranormal, and have never really experienced anything, but recently some things have happened that I just wanted to chalk down as a coincidence, but have made me feel really uneasy at the time. A couple of weeks into the job, I was closing with a couple of other people. When we close, we have to wait for all the showings to end, so we can go collect trays after the last showings. We have 4 huge auditoriums and 8 smaller ones, so we had just gone through one big auditorium, Theatre 3. It's got an eerie vibe compared to the other bigger ones, and a couple of us were just chatting in there while we waited for the next showings. I made mention of ghosts since they've been working there longer than me, and they told me a few stories. While we continued on about ghosts, a theatre light flickered. I didn't notice it, but they did, and told me. I just assumed they were pulling my leg. I was in the middle of mentioning some stories of a friend who previously worked there, when suddenly that light went out. We chuckled awkwardly, and I brushed it off as a coincidence. Well, fast forward to last week. I'm in Theatre 3 with one other guy who's been there for a while as well. Naturally, I want to see if he has any experiences, so I ask. We talk about it, and I begin mentioning the light going out in the theatre. We're at the very top seats closest to the ceiling, and there's a light right above me that happens to go out as we discuss it. I awkwardly laugh and say, "Guess this number 3 is haunted," but I can't shake that's a coincidence. A little later, I head to Theatre 6 alone, make sure it's empty and collect the trays. Theatre 6 is the theatre where the full apparition was seen. I'm walking across the last row, when suddenly the light above me goes dim. I glance around super quickly, and notice no other light is affected. I talk and laugh to myself, screw that, and I rush out of there. I felt so nervous after that. I'm just curious if anyone thinks that was paranormal in any way, or if I'm getting spooked too easily. In university, I worked a summer job at an old small town theatre. It was a bit of a tourist attraction, and like many theatres, there were ghost stories attached to it. This theatre has even been featured in a couple of ghost stories, books, and TV shows. I had spent months of my life in this building and never experienced anything. So, I just took it for bullshit, like most theatre superstitions. In the mornings when I would go to work, I'd come in through the main lobby doors and then walk down the seating aisle of the theatre towards the stage of the stairwell that led to the basement where the dressing rooms and offices were. I never bothered to turn the lights on despite the room being very dark. There were no windows and there was only ambient glow from the exit signs. I knew the path, and having worked in dark theatres for years, I have pretty good night vision. One morning, I walk in the door, and I'm about to step into the theatre, and for some reason I just couldn't do it. I was suddenly terrified to walk into the room. Just looking into the dark gave me goosebumps, and I felt like I would cry. I couldn't explain it. I ended up turning on every single light in the theatre before I would even step foot in it. This became my new habit for the rest of my time I worked there. In my previous journeys to Arizona, I explored all the natural wonders, like the Grand Canyon, Superstition Mountain, the Painted Desert. My grandfather had an obsession with the Old West, cowboys and spaghetti westerns. He was so determined to go to Tombstone to see the OK Corral. So we went to Tombstone. Mind you, I'm a guy who can be viewed as a sensitive. To describe the trip in words, it was a strange one. So we arrived at Tombstone at around 10 in the morning. We do our tourist things, old-timey photos, try on weird hats, try their old beers, and look at the pictures. After a few hours, we decided to go to the old theatre. This place was not very big, 2 stories high. A lady is standing in front of it, saying that there are tours of the theatre starting at $10 a person. So we go in. This theatre is one of those that has a poker room on the bottom floor, top floor with blankets blocking off some small rooms for the prostitution and a stage. Me being me, I decided to go ahead of the tour. I went to see what's ahead by myself. I saw 2 steps that led up to a very small room with a piano to the left, a wall of photos to the right, and the thing that I didn't notice at the very center was an old hearse with a casket in it, with a portrait of someone who had been transported to their final resting place. I'm not moving, mind you. I'm standing as still as a telephone pole. The casket inside is closed. Every muscle wants to leave, but my mind wasn't working with my body. I see the casket lid lift up and then close. I was completely alone and don't remember leaving the room, but I did, and then was back with the rest of the group. It was a freaky experience. I'm a 17-year-old male, working a minimum wage job at a movie theatre. It's a small family-owned establishment in Jersey. Nothing like Regal Cinemas or AMC. It's just an okay neighborhood, but a lot seems to happen in the area of the township. So this happened on my very first day working there. I'm behind the register, learning how to ring up customers' food. My trainer leaves me to help a few customers, sensing I've got it down. Bad idea. A gentleman walks in, balding, and with what appears to be snot dripping from his nose. A lot of it. Greenish, shiny. And in his hand he had one of those probiotic milkshakes. He walks right up to me, completely ignoring the customer I'm with. Hey, look at me. I look around, and he's clearly speaking to me, and that's definitely not my name. I hope you're one moment, sir, I tell him. Clearly, he doesn't like my answer. I'm off my meds now. I ain't crazy, man. The guy gets more agitated, scowling at me, and I'm getting more and more uneasy, and none of my co-workers are in sight. I'm sorry, sir, I don't know you. If you keep calling me crazy, man, he interrupts, I'll take you behind the dumpster and break off your legs and your jaw and dump your ass in there. I know when you get off. Now, I'm clearly shaken, and the customer left, also disturbed. Thanks, man. But before I can even think of what to say or do, the guy walks off and starts smacking an arcade machine we have, trying to talk to a father and a child across the room. I hear him say something about meds, right as my trainer walks back in. I tell her the story, and she asks the man to leave. He seems hesitant, but he does as she asks. Needless to say, I didn't walk alone to my car after that shift. I was performing in a play at my local community theatre. Before the play starts, or towards the end of an intermission, it's normal for someone on the stage crew, usually the stage manager or assistant director, to periodically poke their heads into the dressing rooms to let everyone know how long they have left until curtain up. The venue I perform with only has one dressing room, so both boys and girls use it at the same time. Meh, it's a theatre. We're all sitting around chatting, when the guy opens the door and does the call. So, one of the guys thought somebody was using one of the 2 bathrooms in there, and one was obviously empty. He knocks on the door and says, 2 minutes. At least 5 of us, me and the guy that knocked, and maybe 3 others, heard a female voice from inside clearly say, "Thank you." After about 30 more seconds, when no one came out, he knocked again and opened the door, and there wasn't anyone in there. There were no windows in that bathroom, and only one door opening into the dressing room. We were all standing there. The voice definitely had the echoing muffle quality that you'd expect to hear from someone in a bathroom, and the guy that knocked insisted he heard it coming from inside. Not only was he right next to me and the door, but he's not the type of person to believe in paranormal occurrences. This happened to my friend Josh about 4 years ago. Josh was working at our local movie theatre in a crummy little town. It was about 2 a.m. and he was cleaning up all the popcorn debris that was left behind from a midnight viewing. He's just texting me lazily as I was playing World of Warcraft at the time and was using his company to stay awake. And then I get a message that says something happened, and I didn't hear from him for about 40 minutes. When he gets back to me, he says that he was just clearing up some popcorn that someone spilled and picking up someone's little cup when he heard a little giggle behind him. It sounded like a young child, definitely female. He turned around, creeped out, as he knew there was no one there, and no one was there. The sound was now coming from the hallway, so down the stairs he plopped and peeked around the corner. No one was there. At that moment, he decided he'd had enough, went to speak with a co-worker, and cooled off for about 20 minutes before venturing back in. He didn't hear that girl again, but when he spoke with a manager the next day, it was common knowledge in that theatre that it is haunted by the ghost of a little girl, as allegedly, the site the movie theatre stands on used to be an old schoolhouse, where apparently some girls died. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed these movie theatre horror stories. If you did, don't forget to drop a like and leave a comment with your thoughts. And if you're new, why not subscribe and press the bell icon for even more scary stories. I think I might go to the movie theatre right now, in fact, and maybe see that new movie with Anne Hathaway and Rebel Wilson. I can't even remember the name, but I think it looks funny. So yeah, maybe we'll do that. And if I have a horror story, I'll be sure to tell you tomorrow. Oh, and if there's a story that you would like to share, feel free to send it to my email or my Reddit. But with that being said, it's time for me to sign off. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.